To navigate the highest realms of philosophy and theology, we must rely on a strict premise. Wisdom cannot be conquered by malice. Truth cannot be built on deception, even if that deception is wrapped in religious devotion. Yet a persistent assumption haunts modern mysticism. It suggests that to truly encounter the divine, human reason must be shattered against the absurd. The intellect, under this framework, is treated as a barrier to faith, requiring the believer to embrace logical impossibilities. The French philosopher Simone Weil represents an influential figure in the school of thought. She moved beyond simple prayer into a realm where intellectual surrender was no longer a symptom of a crisis, but a formal theological requirement. Her core premise is stated directly in her writings. The impossibility is the door to the supernatural. She demands that the gateway to the divine must inherently be blocked by what the mind cannot process. We have to question the foundation of this demand. Does an authentic encounter with God actually require the abandonment of logic? Or is this forced paradox a dangerous spiritual trap dressed up as piety? The philosopher Olavo de Carvalho spent years deconstructing these mystical texts. He approached Weil's assertions not as unassailable dogma, but as philosophical propositions demanding rigorous scrutiny. Carvalho's central thesis cuts straight to the error. This pious sophistry confuses subjective psychology with objective reality. It takes a temporary human emotion, despair or a feeling of helplessness, and mistakes it for a universal law governing the nature of being. Carvalho argues that when a theology begins to rely on the affirmation of contraries to find God, it provides the structural blueprint for secular irrationalism. Once you accept that a statement is true because it contradicts itself, you have the exact engine used in the Marxist dialectic, where every social condition supposedly implies its own opposite. This method inevitably leads to the frameworks of thinkers like Friedrich Nietzsche. If logical coherence is no longer the standard for truth, then truth becomes nothing more than an expression of power or a shifting historical force. Elevating artificial paradoxes into absolute theology does not elevate faith. It reduces God to an imaginary solution conjured up to solve a purely psychological problem. Weil applies her doctrine of impossibility directly to human nature. She asserts that desire is impossible, that lovers cannot truly be one, and therefore a person must desire nothingness. This conclusion relies on a deeply flawed assumption about human connection. Weil assumes that human love inherently seeks the mutual disappearance of both individuals, a total extinguishing of the self into the other. Classical Christian metaphysics outright rejects this. We can look to the Thomistic tradition to see a mathematically precise contrast to Weil's despair. Thomas Aquinas defines love not as extinction, but as the desire for the eternity of the beloved. It is the active willing of the other person's continued existence and flourishing. True physical and spiritual love function as mechanisms of conservation and revigoration. The individual is sustained, the bond is fortified, and the species is preserved. Defining desire as a drive for mutual disappearance is a perverse impulse. It lacks the minimum requirement of generosity and protection that defines genuine love. Weil extends this pessimism to existence itself, stating with sweeping certainty that human life is pure impossibility and absurdity. Carvalho identifies a strict logical error here. Weil routinely confuses universal contradictories, things that cannot logically exist simultaneously, with experiential contraries, different emotional states that a human being cycles through. Look at this diagram of human consciousness. Our lived experience constantly oscillates. At the peaks, we feel purpose. At the troughs, profound misery. In the abstract, they contradict, but in our minds, they are merely contraries. We shift between them. Weil's error is taking this natural oscillation and artificially freezing it at its lowest possible point. She declares that this subjective feeling of misery is the only objective reality. By doing this, she dismisses the entire sense phase of human experience. The moments of clarity, purpose, and logic are written off as purely imaginary comfort measures. The deductive consequence of this is fatal to theology. If human misery is the singular objective reality and everything else is an imaginary cope, then God himself is rendered imaginary. This brings us back to Weil's foundational premise, the claim that impossibility is the door to the supernatural. To deconstruct this, we must define what impossibility actually is. First, there is logical impossibility. This is an absolute violation of identity, a square circle. Even God cannot violate logical impossibility because he is absolute identity. Second, there is physical impossibility. This is a relative, physical barrier based on current limitations. A paralyzed man attempting to walk faces a physical impossibility, not a logical one. True miracles, when they occur, overcome physical impossibilities. They dissolve natural barriers. They never overcome logical impossibilities, because logic is the structure of reality. Experiencing a pervasive sense of universal impossibility in daily life is a well-documented psychological symptom of depression. It is not a marker of advanced metaphysical realism. God is found through the ultimate resolution of reality. Treating psychological paralysis as the only valid pathway to the divine is a profound miscalculation. Weil applies this exact miscalculation to the Christian dogma of the Incarnation. She argues it represents an impossible descent, and that its spiritual value comes precisely from its sheer unintelligibility. Classical ontology provides a direct counter. The real is, by strict definition, possible. If something happened, it is logically coherent. Furthermore, classical theology argues the Incarnation is possible eminenter, in the most eminent degree. A creator possessing the capacity to enter his creation is a requirement of omnipotence. Carvalho provides a fascinating literary analogy to illustrate this, using the Argentine writer Ernesto Sabato. In his novel Abaddon el Exterminador, Sabato simply wrote himself into the text. He exists as the ultimate creator of the story, and simultaneously operates as a character interacting with his own creations. Look at the geometry of authorship. We have a higher dimensional creator's realm intersecting a lower dimensional created universe. The author crossing the boundary into the created space is a logically sound function of ultimate authority over the system. If a human author possesses the power to step into their own text without violating logic, declaring that an almighty God is incapable of entering the physical cosmos is a denial of omnipotence itself. When theology treats the Incarnation as an impossible absurdity, it completely severs the link between the divine and the physical world. This destruction of cosmological coherence leaves a philosophical void. If God cannot logically enter or relate to the physical world, then the world is no longer seen as an ordered creation. It is merely a nothingness or an abyss. Under this logic, God is accidentally transformed into an anti-cosmic force, a being who is seemingly disgusted by the physical universe he made. When Christian thought stopped explaining how the physical world, the stars, the elements, the human body, relates to God, it abandoned the field of cosmology. Materialist doctrines simply moved in to fill that empty space. By sacrificing logic for a sense of mystery, theologians lost the tools needed to explain reality. This retreat left the culture without a framework to counter the rise of materialist ideologies. The ultimate danger of Weil's apophatic extreme is epistemological. It demands the active, deliberate repression of human intelligence. It encourages a state of perverse innocence, the act of blinding your own conscience and intellect specifically so you can feel devout. You force yourself not to understand things you actually comprehend perfectly well. This deliberate self-deception mirrors the root mechanics of severe psychological neuroses. A mind trained to hate its own capacity for logic will inevitably fracture. Carvalho issues a blunt warning about this method. Trying to reach the truth by lying to yourself about what makes sense is a bilinguus maledictus, a cursed double tongue. Human beings possess an intuitive grasp of reality and logic. Rejecting that innate light in favor of an artificial, performative darkness is a direct offense against the intellect. The classical realist position stands firm. Genuine spiritual profundity aligns perfectly with objective reality. Order exists, and the mind is equipped to recognize it. The ultimate mysteries of existence hold value because they contain profound sense. They are not valuable simply because they are incomprehensible. The true path to understanding respects the structure of reality. It does not demand that we pretend to break the universe to find its maker. From the Islamic philosophical tradition to the strict axioms of Thomas Aquinas, the command remains consistent. You must reach the truth through the truth. True faith demands the rigorous exercise of the intellect. It proves that authentic wisdom is never conquered by forced absurdity.